What's up, everybody? Welcome to We Have Cool Friends, the cool show. We interview our cool friends about the cool things they're doing. I'm Greg Miller, and this is my cool friend, Andy McNamara.
How you doing, Greg?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing well. Doing well.
Have you? So, like, you've retired. You know what I mean? You've just taken 29 years at Game Informer.
Yeah,
you led the charge, and then now you're done. Are you just like back to being Andy in high school? You're just eating Tostino pizza rolls, playing games in your basement.
I did do some of that this week. I did some work and then got some things done, but I definitely yesterday I sat and just played games all day. But that's I will tell you this, the one thing that's lame about retiring from game journalism is that I was like, if I was a journalist, I would have Ghost of Tsushima right now, and I don't.
Yeah.
And that sucks.
Yeah. You're Superman, right? And Superman 2. You've gone into the crystal. You've given away your powers. Now you're just a mortal man again. You got to beg anybody you know for codes.
Exactly.
I don't even know where to start, Andy, because I mean, Game Informer, obviously an institution. And I think obviously for somebody like me, right, that like grew up knowing they wanted to do this for a living, that they wanted to talk about games. Game Informer, one of the name amongst names. And so then to see you as always the face, and not only the face of Game Informer, but like the head of it, right? Like how long were you EIC? How long were you in charge of Game Informer?
I think around like late 93, I became co-editor, or maybe early 94, but I became editor-in-chief, I think June of 94. So since then, been doing it. Like,
I saw you do the tweet of like, something big's coming. Like, like watch this space, something big's about to happen. And I was like, what's happening? Like, I thought it was a cover reveal. I thought it was whatever. And then it was you actually leaving. Like, I guess start there. Like, how long has this decision to leave games journalism, to leave Game Informer been gestating for you?
I mean, it's tough. I mean, I think one thing is that, game journalism across the board has changed a lot over the years, right?
Sure.
I mean, like I've seen it in all forms, right? Over 29 years, right? I remember when it was like, people were like, there's game journalism, right? You know what I mean? Like, like that its near existence was questioned. So I've seen a lot of change, and it's definitely like one of those things that, like, when you're making a magazine, it's like, it's so weird when you all of a sudden are like one of the few still making a magazine when, when everything is kind of happening in different places. Now that said, I also think it's very cool and it was a lot of fun, but the world had changed a lot. And, I kind of felt like, I just started thinking about like, I needed to do something different. Right. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't going to go be online 24/7. You know what I mean? I'm probably boring to most of the kids out there. Right.
Don't let them in on our secret. We're all very boring.
I'm no ninja kind of thing. So, it was like, was it do that? So I started thinking about just what my next chapter would be, like where would I go? What would I do next? And I just thought to myself, like, man, I've done this a long time. I think it'd just be cool to do something else. I think when I think about it, I think about how much I've learned about games over 29 years, how much I've learned about talking about games, about how games are made, all the friends I've made, getting a chance to sit down and just talk to developers as you have, Greg. It's just, there's nothing better than sitting down and just like learning about how things are done and what they're doing and where they got to as a game developer and a game company.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to think, what can I do to like kind of apply that in new ways? And so like, last year, Game Informer had some layoffs. And when those layoffs happened, I was like, you know what? I'm done. Like I've been thinking about it, but once that happened, that was the push. I was like, that's it. No more. Like, let's go find something different. Cause I think that's the hardest thing when you do something for 29 years. Even if I ever had any, like, a down day where you're like, I'm quitting and I'm going to go do something else. You're like, I only know how to do one thing. Let's keep doing it. Right.
Oh, totally. I'm well aware of that.
Because change is tough. Change is scary. I think, I'm scared right now, like as I embark on something new, I'm excited at the same level. Right. You know what I mean? And I think there's certainly that cliche that like, that means you're doing something right. That sometimes every once in a while you got to take a chance and go do something else. And
I like every once in a while you got to take a chance. You did 29 years of not taking any chances. You just did the path the least resistance.
Yeah, I mean, you must have, like, when you left, when you had left up at noon, right? That must have been like when you guys started Kind of Funny. That must have been terrifying, right?
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I know it well, and I think that's what's. I don't know. Yeah, obviously, I can't even hold a candle to 29 years of doing it. But like in the same way, I always tell people, like, I was the last hire at IGN that was the old school IGN. That was the people who are like, like Chris Roper, who like, I dropped out of school and I drank 40s and I'm here reviewing video games. Like that doesn't happen anymore, really, right? Like people are now have gone to college and done this thing, and this has been their path forever. I'm not talking shit about Roper, obviously, I love him, but it was this idea that like I was that bridge between it. So like just what you're talking about, the way it's changed and the way I've seen it all evolve and go into different directions I never would have imagined. I never would have imagined that we would, that when I started at IGN in 2007 to review PSP games, that I'd be here in my house, I guess, streaming an interview show. You know what I mean? Like, that's just so ridiculous that wasn't what it was meant to be. So the fact that you were able to stay there and do it for so long, on the one hand, I think is so admirable and so cool, and go through those storms and see so many different people come in of Game Informer and go out to make their own legacy, whether they're Dan or Tim or whoever, the MinMax guys now. Like it's that incredible thing. But then I can also for us with IGN, it was always like at that precipice of leaving, it was like, if we don't do this now, we're always going to look back and say, what would have happened? Yeah, it's cool, and like we have jobs and everything's great at IGN, but what would have happened if we would have left? And I feel like that's part of this, right? Even for you.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that's, I think that's it. You watch the change, and especially too, like, I think it's like media, and I mean media around the world, by the way, like are challenged with the fact that like everyone's having a conversation. Even like being right sometimes is really difficult just because like so few people fact check, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's just such a different world. And I definitely have like old school thoughts about how that's done. And sometimes I think like it's a new, more conversational discussion that's going on around games, So I
which is
think
good and bad, right? Like I'm right there with you of like, again, like, I grew up on EGM, Game Pro, Game Informer. And so like when I went to Mizzou to get a journalism degree, like I had all the journalist ethics pounded into me, and I'll never forget. It's better, but like I never forget like that first review I wrote at IGN where I finished it and I went over to Roper and I was like, cool, that review's done. He's like, all right, cool, publish it. And I was like, don't you want to read it? Like, he's like, God. I'm like, oh my God, where the fuck am I? And then even today, like, we just did Games Daily, and Games Daily has a section of, called You're Wrong, where we have people live write in for corrections, because like it terrifies me. And I feel like, like my job is to talk about games, but like when I get something wrong, I feel like, why am I even, I'm so bad at this. Why am I doing this? And like, to your point of, the world right now is that hot take, get the tweet out, get the thing out, react, don't even think, just tweet, react. And it's like so tough to do that. And for you guys or for Game Informer as a magazine, right, to keep that relevant and growing. I can't imagine the trials and tribulations you faced.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing. And also the thing that's interesting in the space too overall is just that, like, I mean, there was a time, when you talk about my 29 years, there was a time where I was like, hey man, there's like 350 games coming out this year. I can play a lot of these. Right.
Yeah.
Now 350 games a week.
Yep.
Right. You know what I mean? Like it's just like insane how many games are out there. And like when you're like, I'm a game expert, and people are like, well, have you heard of this? And you're like, well, no. I mean, that's like 7 people. Like, you can't really expect for us to know all that stuff, right?
Oh, totally.
And it's also interesting too, like the way it's like there's a generalist press and then there's like a specialty press now that I think is like super interesting. Like I think the specialty press really can like dig in a lot on like one game, and people who focus on one game or play one game every single day. Like they have an interesting perspective. And so I think it's great. There's just so many different voices that are out there about games, which is, once again, when you kind of look back, I remember a time where like, will someone please take games seriously? And now it's like, everyone
take them so seriously. Not take them so seriously. I'm not being this angry about everything. Yeah.
Less angry about everything. Yeah. It's like now I think it is global and it is everywhere, and everyone then, wants to chime in, and we have things like, I think the Last of Us 2 discussion is one of those things where it's like, it's out of control. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it is definitely out of control, where anyone says anything positive, they get ripped on it. People say anything negative, they get ripped on it. It's a really warped discussion. about a game that's like, like it or hate it, we should be celebrating that someone spent a ton of money to make this crazy good looking game that's like different than everything else that we've
exactly
played, right?
like that pushes boundaries, right? And I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but like my take on it always is that I feel like right now the conversation around The Last of Us Part 2 and the game itself, right, is this watershed moment of it's going to be something hopefully we're able to point to and be like, see, we said games were growing up. We said we were still a young industry and we were getting there, and we're starting finally to get games that are akin to films that were in the silent era coming into the talkies that were like pushing the envelope in a way of like, this is not what a blockbuster is. Why is this happening? And then you get to the point now where it's like, a million movies come out, and at no point when you watch the other movie, well, I shouldn't even say that, I guess, but like it's most point when you watch the movie, you're not like, this is ruining everything. This isn't what I wanted. I wanted a detective story and they gave me a thriller and I'm angry now. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like, what are we having this conversation about?
Yeah. And it's also too, like, I know some people were like, it's really dark and like really, and it's like, why does Hollywood only get to spend a ton of money on like a dark tale? Why can't we? You know what I mean? Like, why can't games? I mean, I think it's interesting that as we grow, we still have so much to learn as an industry. We still have so much to learn as consumers. But like I said, at one point I was like, I hope this game thing works out, and now it's like insane, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I think it was that thing. It's interesting to see the ramifications of when we used to have to sit there and argue with Roger Ebert if games were art. And now it's like, no, they're full-blown art, but now the audience has to wrestle with what that actually means. Is that you're going to play games that there's an interesting question a few weeks ago on one of the shows that was like, do games need to be fun? Like, we play, video games inherently are games. Don't they need to be fun to be a video game? And it was this thing of like, historically that would be what you would say, but I think we've slowly been moving away from that. And like now you find fun in The Last of Us, in the crafting, the combat, the head scratching of how do I get these enemies without them seeing me, or how do I take this thing out that seems overwhelming. But yeah, the story doesn't need to be fun, does it? Like, it's to what you're saying. Why can only a movie give you those kind of emotions?
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite movies is There Will Be Blood, right? Sure. And that movie is unnerving and scary, and like there's no one I'm like, man, I really love this hero. This protagonist is great, right? Like it's pretty dark. And even like something like Kentucky Route Zero, right? That finally finished up as an episodic. Like when you look at what it's about, it's dark and murky and heavy, right? But I think that's what makes it interesting, because you can have Mario who's like, whee! And you can have on the other end of the spectrum things that are the antithesis of that.
Sure.
So I think that shows that games are growing. We should be happy about it. Agreed. I think we really should be.
For you personally, I mean, being this in the industry this long, being a game informer that long, is there a tipping point where you look around and you're like, wait a second, like when you're talking, because I remember this too. I remember in 2007, I was joking around about playing Paper Mario on the Wii, because like it came out. Like there was a time where you could play every game that came out. Like,
yeah.
Do you remember in your tenure of running this magazine when it started to really shift, or was it all so slow that like by the time we realized we were in a different place, we had been there for a while?
I think it's one of those things that I'm really trying to be. By the way, it took me like 25 years to change my perspective on this. Just to show you how stupid I am at some degree. But I remember going to an event. I think it was where like one of the speakers was, "Hey everybody, we made Snake. These mobile games are going to take over. You're going to love mobile games." And at the time I had some Motorola flip phone in my pocket that was just awful. And I was like, I don't want to play this. I mean, Snake's kind of cool, but like, I have no interest in where this is going to go. And they would show charts like, hey, look at all the millions and billions of dollars that mobile games are going to make. And I'm like, I don't want to play those. That's going to fail. Ha 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 ha. Boy, like wrong, right? Like, obviously mobile blew up. And I think once you kind of start to see the change, you go like, whoa, this is going to get big. This is going to go somewhere. This is going to reach a lot of people. But my first reaction was definitely like, I don't know about that. And also too, like I loved it when indie started. I was like, these are great, man. I really hope people can make a lot of these. I think we'll probably get like 10 or 12 of these a year. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, we're getting hundreds of these a year, right? And I think that really showed how much passion people had for games. I think I underestimated that. Sure. Because I think a lot of those games were born from passion. And I loved hearing those stories early on of like, hey, I made this game in a Starbucks.
Yep.
Right. Like I was the one guy and I made this game, and it was just like daunting and impressive. And so I think that's like the tipping point, and that happened probably about 10 years ago now. You know what I mean? I think once we really got like things like Steam really started to get into play, and like there were new ways for games to get out. And also too, I think a big change too that I didn't really see when you talk about the mistakes I've made. I remember when Sony announced that they were going to be on, CD-ROM, and I was like, man, I really like Nintendo. Like, I like cartridges. I like how fast they like boot up. I don't really want to like sit around. And every example I'd gotten was like sitting around for 5 or 6 seconds to get to something. And then I was like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't like these full motion video stuff. I don't like this. But it changed the way games were distributed, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it changed the way the dollar went. Like, instead of a $25 cartridge that we were paying for, it became a $3 disc, and just changed the way games were going out and the way games were being could get to consumers, right? And I think we've just seen those kind of inherent changes in the way that games are delivered and the way that games reach people that have just accelerated the access. And we all know games are great. Just people have to get a chance to find ones that they love, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what happened. And that was one of the things that Game Informer, when I was there, and I know it's still important to them now, it's like helping people find games they love, because that's really how people fall in love with games. It's like, not every game's for everyone, but help people find the games that resonate with them and what kind of games they like to play.
Yeah. And I think that's, what the best part of the job is trying to connect those dots, right? I love it when somebody hits me up and is, I played this game because of you. And and this is why I love it. It's my favorite thing. Or, having a conversation again, back to Last of Us right now, like the amount of people consuming the spoiler cast and then who are hitting me up afterwards of like, thank you. I needed that. I needed to talk to someone. And even though talking to someone was listening to us talk about it, right? Like that's what this all is Clubhouse vibe of just talking about what you love.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I love it when there's a game that's big enough, that it resonates with so many people that we can have these big conversations, that we can hear so many different perspectives. Because I think that's the thing people forget. Like, I got a lot of people send me like, I hate you on Twitter type things that are like, I don't mind hearing like people that don't like the game. I have a couple friends that I had long conversations with. It was like super interesting. Like, why didn't you like it?
Yeah.
What did you find was lacking about Abby? And it wasn't just like, she wasn't what I wanted. It was actually things like, hey, you know what I mean? Like, she went too far. I cared too much about Ellie. You know what I mean? Like things like that.
Sure.
That, like, I was like, that's a fair assessment and real critique of like where things are going. And I love those conversations. I think that's interesting. I think that like helps us move forward as a medium.
That's way more interesting, right? That we all walk away from a piece of art and have our own interpretation of it, our own decisions on it, why this happened, what the symbolism was. I've been saying it, but like, I think, for the next 10 years, we're going to be having these conversations. You're going to go out to a bar and have a drink and talk about big moments in games and get to these things. And then that's the rest of the night of why do you think this happened the way it happened? Where do you go with this? And then on top of that, the layered in perspectives of everything else. And like, like the critiques people had of Isaac, no spoilers, but I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I never thought about that, but I get what you're saying. I understand why that character doesn't work for you.
Yeah, I think that's, I think it's interesting too. And I think it's great when we can have those conversations on different levels. Like, I thought Red Dead 2 was a great conversation, about like, well, the horse takes a long time to get anywhere. And it's like, yeah, it's the Old West. They want you to like, like they want you to run into stuff. And, I was like, but I mean, I want fast travel. I want the game stuff, and I think it's interesting when games put those problems ahead of us and make an editorial direction as a group that doesn't please everyone, because you really can't. And some people thought it was genius, and some people, were annoyed by it. But I think it's stuff that we talk about, like you said, for decades to come. And the next person that puts a horse in a game is going to go, we got to talk about Red Dead 2, right? The next person that does a dark story is going to be like, we need to talk about, The Last of Us Part 2. I mean, I think that's great that we have this, like that the kind of catalog of interesting and influencing art is always growing in the game space.
Talk to me about a Game Informer review. How many times for you was there a policy? Did it evolve? Did it change? Did you talk about what you wanted people to achieve in it? Because I always, the thing about print that I think is lost on so many people in our age right now of .coms is like, on IGN, we'd write reviews as long as you want them to be. And in the old days, right, Hillary would want to write like a 9-page GTA 4 review. And it's like, all right. But like with you guys, right, like there are word counts and inches to worry about and stuff. Like what did you tell people who came in to write reviews when you started leading the team versus where you were at the end?
Well, I think I circle a little bit back to like, we really wanted to make sure we got people, in that kind of a little bit of a consumer reports sense, like, hey, we wanted to make sure they knew what, like let's use cars as an example, like automobiles,
Sure.
it's got 4-wheel drive, right? It's got all
Yep.
these things like, we've always felt like we need to get a little bit of the data in there to help them make the decisions. But we always wanted to frame that around what were our views and what we enjoyed about the game and what we found compelling about the game. Try to get in something about what the story is, get them a lead on that so they can figure out if that's something, a hole you want to go down, especially as games grew and there were more and more games. I think gamers in particular, you can be a lot more choosy about what you play.
Yeah.
I think that was all very important to get in there. And I think it was just spending time. A lot of times, the discussion would be like, oh, hey, I think this game is this. And you'd be like, well, your review does not explain why you think it is an 8 or why you think it's a 7 or why you think it's a 10, right? You need to like make sure you're expressing why you are fond or dislike a game.
Show, don't tell, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. And I think, in the old days when we just did print, it was a little bit easier to kind of take your time and mosey down there.
I hated you guys. I'd be at E3, we'd be at something, and we'd finish the event, and you'd be like, you want to get a drink? And we're like, no, we have to go write all this. Like, oh, we won't write it for weeks. We'll talk to you later.
I know, it was so great. I actually miss those days a lot. Those were a lot of fun at E3, especially it was like, man, I feel sorry. We walk by the IGN booth and they'd have the like clear glass on the
fishbowl,
booth.
everybody in there working as hard as possible. Yeah.
Be like, bye. See you guys later.
You suck.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that's, something even for us later. I mean, I always felt like there were stories you were always going to get at E3. They were only going to happen at E3. And like making sure you got up some news piece at E3 didn't mean as much as like going and like talking to people and actually learning something.
Of course.
But it's hard to straddle that, right? Like in the demands. I mean, the modern day demands of a media company are very high.
Yeah.
By the way, they're like it's crazy.
If you did not know.
Yeah.
So was that, how did you deal with those growing pains? Because I remember when Game Informer started the .com. Well, I mean, you already had the .com, but you got serious. Like, okay, cool. We're gonna make the .com something that's being updated, like on the daily, right? I think it was Jim Riley, the first news editor you guys brought over. I remember Jim going over there because we knew him. It was a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, how long had you seen that coming? Did you know that was going to fundamentally change everything? Like, how does that shake out?
I mean, I've been spending, I could see which way the wind was blowing. You know what I mean? Like, I think we wanted to invest in that for a long time. It was always just my job was to convince, the powers that be that this was the right thing to invest in. And it's like tough because, I mean, we kind of talked about this a little bit before the show, but it's like, hey, this content is important to people. And like someone who runs a business goes like, well, what's it worth? Like, it's important to people and it does this and it goes on to here and like it creates conversation. They're like, yeah, but like it needs clicks. And right, there's no clicks on a magazine, by the way. There's no like, you just send it out. There's no more data, right? Like you can.
You're lucky you get a letter in the mail that has a drawing on it. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Which we got a ton of those, which is always astounding to me. We had so much feedback from all that stuff. So I think we always looked at like that was an area for growth, but it's a tough space, and there was like real great competitors in there. People who had been well established in GameSpot and IGN, and then I think as the world changed and kind of got to more things like where we look at things like Kind of Funny, where you guys are, I think, and Rooster Teeth as well, right? Like where there's just like changing the way that they're doing that online stuff, right? Like by not doing daily news, except in like conversation, not having to worry about writing it up, you can do a lot of different things.
Sure.
So I think we always wanted to do more, but it was tough because we had this sounds silly, but the magazine was super successful. Like we always needed to do that and like always needed to like invest the time to make sure we were making that the best we could make it. And that was really important, to do. Cause I think, I mean, it was crazy how many people it was still reaching and still doing, even as I walked away, it's like, you're kind of like, wow, okay, I'm walking out the door. Oh yeah, that's right. It still reaches, 6 million people. That's crazy, and so, there's just a lot of people I think want to have a lot of information and conversation about games, and we just wanted to be a part of it. But it was tough to do all those things, right?
Yeah, like I can't imagine like the complexity of running the video game magazine, right? Like the last one standing for the most part. I know I'm being, painting a broad brush, but the video game magazine, and then also the.com, and trying to figure out what goes where and how are you doing this and where are you going? And to your point that we were talking about earlier of like not being wrong, I can only imagine as .coms took off and everything started going and you were making the magazine, the amount of times you send out a print edition and then while it's at the printer, somebody puts out a news article that not put something wrong in the magazine, but like you're like, oh, I don't know what the release date is for this game, and then it turns out the release date's out 2 seconds later, and like because we have it all the time with podcasts, but that's a podcast, and tomorrow I get another shot at it. Whereas with the magazine, it's like, all right, it's a month of that being out there and people not understanding.
Well, you nailed that one. Certainly, you're like, oh, great. When people get this in 10 days, they're going to be like, how did you idiots not know this game is coming out? And you're like, well, there's a timeline here.
Yeah.
That happened a lot, and I think mistakes are always hurt a little bit more there. I mean, there's every once in a while, one of our classics was like, we had these templates and we're like, don't use templates, use empty templates. Don't use an old copy of the thing. And like someone would accidentally use one and then all of a sudden it would be like, The Last of Us Part 2 coming on PlayStation 4 and Xbox. And you're like, no. Like we've called the printer and been like, please tell me it's not on press. We need to get this changed because this is a bad mistake. Because everyone notices, right? Like no one notices when you do everything right. It's when you do the one thing wrong and then that's top on Reddit and you have to hear about it and kind of shake your head in shame.
So what I always found interesting was the way I think from the .com side, we would look at Game Informer. And it was always that thing of, as IGN and .coms became more and more important and more, I guess larger and larger is the way I'm trying to say it. I'm doing it terribly. I remember how much like the Game Informer cover was always the bane of IGN's existence. Because it was that thing where we'd always be negotiating for exclusives or whatever and be like, oh, sorry, but Game Informer's got it. We're like, why? Don't like I remember like people would roll out stats and numbers and like, no, but it's like and it would literally just be the thing of like, it's in GameStop. What do you want me to do? It's at the cash register. Like when Ryan McCaffrey was on We Have Cool Friends a few months ago, probably now, and we talked about how IGN First was like when he came over from OXM, his initiative to be like, we're going to make what would be an IGN.com cover thing to like try to fight the Game Informer cover or magazine covers in general. Like, why do you think that's proliferated the way it has? Because it's still the case, right? Like, it's still such a big deal. We report on them on Games Daily. Like, what is the Game Informer cover? And also, how many times has the new Batman game dropped out? Thank you.
We always call about the Batman game. That's for sure. I think it's tough. I think it's one of those things that like, we always wanted the magazine. I mean, that was one of the things that I think I did. That's the thing with the magazine. I touched so much of it, right? Which is going to be one of these weird things for me going forward. Because I made the logo. I, designed the covers, not specifically, but worked with our design teams to do them. So, it was a big part of those. But a long, long time ago, when we want to make this magazine feel like something cool you put on your coffee table, right? Yeah. That like the art's compelling. And that we really highlight the cover story because we felt like that was super important. And I know people were always like, oh, you sell the cover story or, you know what I mean? You're just, you just do whatever they tell you. And it's like, no, I went out, I would go look at like 5 or 6 games and go like, I think this is the best game. I like what they're doing. I think this is a game that can be a hit. And we're going to put this on the cover and try to like get people excited about things. And sometimes it was like, yeah, here's the next Call of Duty right after that. But we did some of the original Call of Duties, right? When people didn't know what Call of Duty was.
Sure.
And so I think its power was that it is a permanent fixture, right? That it doesn't just appear at the top of your browser and then get replaced 15 seconds later is like the news cycle happens so quickly. It was a slower news cycle, so it gets to sit a little longer, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Totally.
And so I think that was it. And I think for us, I remember, when the internet started to take off, I was like, we need to lean in as a company into what can we do that the internet can't do, which is like, we can do a cover, we can do a big story on this. And like, that was our advantage. And that was a way that we could get information that wasn't on the internet in a print publication to make it relevant. So, I mean, that was really a goal.
Sure.
And then we were just lucky that game developers and publishers played along with that pitch. So, I mean, I brought it up. It's like, hey, let's do this. And I think I've seen a lot of people, like Polygon had a cover story for a while. I think they still do them from time to time. I think people have tried to do that in online form, and I love it. By the way, I think they should.
Oh yeah.
I think everyone should continue to keep doing it. I think it's an interesting way to like really analyze a game too. And we loved it too when we would do something in print, and then we were able to do a lot of like follow-up stories online while we were there for our long visits. It was a lot of fun. I think that kind of in-depth look at a game is something that people really want. And have an opportunity to do so. We were lucky that we got to go do those.
And I think honestly, you nail what you were trying to achieve, because I think that's why I still subscribe and get excited when I get Game Informer, right? Because it is that idea of like, okay, cool, you have it, and it's this coffee table book, right? Like even though we eat, sleep, breathe it, I'm going to the preview events, I'm doing the thing, just to be able to sit there and page through it and look at the art and see it blown up and have it that permanence, right? And the amount of Game Informers I still have, like right now in the other, Lucy's room, but on the bookshelf I leave in there, the Game Informer with a Ghostbusters cover is still in there, right? Because I think like as a fan, you're like, this is just such a cool piece of memorabilia. And I distinctly remember like being at IGN, that issue arriving, and me being like, everybody fuck off, and just sitting there like paging through it, like, you know what I mean? Because that's what they're all about, and they're about poring over those details and reading them again and again. And I think this is the question I want to ask, but I guess we got to go further back to actually answer it. So my question would be, did you know when you were making these issues, that you were making something that had permanence in people's lives? And if not, when did you know that? Because I think, for me being back home and like when I was a kid and I knew I wanted to do this, like my bookshelf was EGMs and Game Informers laid out on the spines there. And then the same thing I'm talking about, it would be that random thing of like, we're on a Friday afternoon and just grab whichever one and read it cover to cover for no reason.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you, Greg. I lost, unfortunately, we had a flood at our office once, and I had like pretty much a full collection of Nintendo Power, EGM, Game Pro. I was all in. I also was a big fan of electronic games back in the day.
Sure.
I had all those. So, I mean, I think I always knew the power of magazines. The influence we had, I never really, it's hard to come to grips with. I mean, I can almost say, even when I announced that I was quitting, that was a weird outpouring for me, because people came back and they were so nice. You kind of underestimate your own value, or at least I do.
Sure.
You know what I mean? At the time, I always feel like, hey, let's get this done. Oh, we got to get this next thing done. Hey, let's do this.
Right.
Oh, hey, this is our plan. I hope people don't think this is stupid. And just like anyone else out there, and I think you probably deal with this as well, Greg, like you hear the worst stuff more than you hear the good stuff. Yep. Even if you get more positive feedback, it's those one or two like negative feedbacks. You're like, yeah, maybe my hair is bad. Oh my gosh.
I do have an annoying laugh.
Yeah, I mean, just like all those things, like they resonate in your head. You're like, how many times does he say like it just starts to wear on you a little bit, and and it takes its toll. So you don't think about it until something like that happens, and so that moment for me, I was very touched. Honestly, so many people said things that I just didn't expect. And I was kind of blown back by that. Sure. But over the years, I always felt the most rewarding thing, or the other time I felt like Game Informer was doing something great, was when the developers would reach out to me afterwards and talk to me about it.
Yeah.
I think people were extremely nice, and maybe they were nice because I was the editor-in-chief of Game Informer. I don't know. I felt like, like these guys, they appreciated the perspective, right? I think a lot of times people sit and work on games, and for a long time, since we would be the first people to see their games, they'd be like, hey, I want to show you this. What do you think? Right.
Yeah.
And get to go sit down and talk to them about it for an hour. And then we get to go back, spend time to write a piece about it. And then they'd get it and they read it and they go like, oh, wow, it's interesting to hear your perspective on what we're making. And it's also interesting to see the things that we've been working on put together. Right. Because everyone's kind of working on their own parts. And usually when something like that happens, or when an event happens, you take all their parts that they're working on and you say, this is what it is. And I always found those conversations to be really rewarding and interesting with the developers or the producers over the years. So I found that to be great,
Totally.
So that was...
You stumble on something interesting, right? That I think is, I've been, asked to go speak at developers before, right? And I was like, why the fuck would I go there? Like, I don't. You guys are the ones with all the talent. You know what you're doing, right? And over the years of being, video and doing the podcast and doing all that stuff, like I found so much that it is the mirror image of each other, but you don't think about it that way. Where it is, I always talk about it, like you're talking about the magazine, I'm talking about the shows, and like there's a mistake in it and you beat yourself up over it, or you put it out and the comments are mean about it, but you get to do another one. Like I always equate that to developers when they put out their game, and usually I'll go talk about online harassment and how much, the vocal minority that, they put out a game that they've worked on for 3 years, 7 years, whatever it is. And the first things they see and the things they get hung up on are I fucking hate this, you know what I mean? Or this thing sucks. And yet not even like as drastic as Last of Us stuff. And it is that thing of having to talk to them and try to explain to them how the internet works, and that, you see the millions of people who play your game, you see the dozens of comments, like they literally don't matter. People play your stuff and they like your stuff, and that's all that matters. But it's the same thing. I can tell them that, and I understand that because I'm talking about games that way. But on our side, we do the same thing. Of you look at like if somebody's mean to you, you're doing this thing. It's like, oh my god, like I guess I am. Like, you know what I mean? Shit, am I bad at this? Are you bad at this? And like, no, you have the millions of subscribers, right, that are reading your magazine, that love what you do. But we don't think about it that way. And it's the same thing of like, I think it's also. It's probably not unique to us, but it feels like it is because we only know our own industry in the way that, like, I remember the first time you walked into a room at an event I was at, and I was like, holy shit, that's Andy. You know what I mean? That's Andy. I totally do. I mean, for somebody who grew up like fucking idolizing gaming mags, yeah, dude. Like, and it was like, holy shit. Because there was that thing of like, oh my God, he's here. And then it was imposter syndrome, right? Of like, I don't belong here. Like, why am I here? Like, I got to pull it together, act like I know what I'm doing, keep on it. I think my first judges week with all of you, I was like, yeah, totally. Like, IGN would only bring me down there as like the second banana guy usually. So it was like, it's a judges only event. Fuck off, Greg. I'm like, all right, bye. But when I was there for Kind of Funny, it was like, all right, pull it together. I belong here. Hello, Jeff. You know what I mean? Like, that's the thing. We don't have those moments to talk about though, because you're out there building relationships or whatever. Like, we're hanging out, playing a game, talking about whatever. Then we all go off to write or do our thing. And we don't have this. It's, I mean, how many, you and I have never sat down and just had a one-on-one conversation for an hour about everything. And it's always in passing, we should do something together. Yeah. You want to do something for the magazine? Of course. All right, cool. And then nothing ever happens because we're all busy. And it's like, that's what we do. And that's how this whole thing works. And I think that's why there is such a imposter syndrome idea that goes around. I think it's why, like, I remember being at IGN and like when at the time it was completely different, obviously, but like completely different leadership when GameSpot wasn't allowed to talk to IGN people at events and shit like that. And I was like, well, are we the Jets and the Sharks? Like, what is going on? And now you see it all the time where people are crossing over and doing everything. And there are no more of those lines, because I do think that the old guard that came up thinking there could only be competition now has this new guard that sees everything as collaboration, which is super interesting.
Yeah, I think that was important that happened, right? It needed to happen. Mm-hmm. Because it is tough to like fight against each other, right? I mean, I think everyone's got the same goal of like, let's have a good time around games.
And I remember that was our first time we ever interacted, was on Twitter. You got mad at IGN for you had done, it was another cover, you had done an exclusive reveal of something. I don't know what it was or when it was anymore. And for the IGN thumbnail for the video, I wasn't even in the video, I think. They took the image and put it into the thumbnail template, and you were like, what the hell? And I was like, well, we credit you in the video. You're like, it doesn't matter, it's not in the thumbnail. I'm like, I don't know, Andy.
Well, it's like there was a time, and this is one of those things that just drove me crazy. You're talking about a thing that drove me crazy about IGN a long time ago. This is a long time ago, but I'd be like, guys, all you have to do is like put a link on the internet to who did it. That's it. That's all you have to do. And like for a long time, it was weird in the game space. It was like, if we were to do something on you guys, we would credit. That's called journalism. That's how you do it. You say what the source is. For a long time, I felt like, I don't know why, but it felt like IGN really didn't want to put sources in for stuff.
I'll tell you why. From behind the scenes, they really didn't want to.
Yeah.
As someone, and again, totally different management and everything else. I remember being in these meetings, and like I was the one again coming in, and like nothing drove me more crazy, Andy, and you'll appreciate this, than coming into IGN and having 3 different editors, maybe 4 different editors, in every one of them spelling okay differently. And I was like, motherfuckers, we need a style guide. And I was like, because these are like the basic nuts and bolts of writing, and that's all we do. And so it was a conversation all the time of, where do we source somebody? And I was like, you source them in the, like, I think you look at articles now and it's, again, all collaboration, right? You look at something, and I'm just calling this out because I think I read it recently, but like anything, Matt Kim does something and it literally is like, this is the news in one line. And the next thing is as reported by Video Game Chronicle, GameSpot, whoever, like, and usually they'll go as far as to say sourcing, reset error, and this, that, and the other. Like now it's great. And I think it's way better. And even this is such a, it's to your point though, that it stands out when you're like, come on, fucking throw me a bone. Polygon did the article about all the Last of Us harassment, right? Recapping it all. And when it went up, I saw it immediately come. I clicked on it. And like paragraph 2, they're like, Neil Druckmann called it the worst day of his life on a podcast. And I was like, that's my podcast. And I clicked on it. And it was some site I don't know. And I'm not talking shit on them. Some site that was reporting on my podcast. And I was like, God damn. And then like literally 3 hours later, somebody sent me a screenshot where they actually went in and fixed it and put Kind of Funny podcast. Like, yeah, all right. You know what I mean? But like, and it wasn't like, I didn't think that was like, you know, them starting a fight or whatever, but it's this little thing, right? And they're a giant article, like who the fuck cares where it comes from? But for you having it be your thing, you're like, come on, just throw me the bone here. You know what I mean?
I mean, people need to realize like getting someone to come on your show takes time.
Yeah.
You know, like everything takes a lot of effort. Like, you know, we would spend months leading up to a cover story, put it out, and then someone would be like, here's new screenshots of the new Mortal Kombat. And you're like, we worked on all that. Like, I get it. But like, this is tons of effort that we put into getting all that stuff done. Like, you could just mention our name, right?
Yeah,
and that's
exactly.
the source. That's it. Like, I don't have any problem with the stories that you're running. That's the way the world works. But like, come on. So that was a thing that, but I think it's so much better now. But that was a thing. So of course, that's how we first interacted, Greg. Of course that is.
It didn't sour me by any stretch of imagination on you, but it was that thing of just like, I thought it was the usual growing pains of what was happening, right? Where it was like, what is the ownership from the magazine? What is our responsibility? Again, I would have credited it way higher, but I wouldn't have watermarked the thumbnail. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's such a ball of wax about it. And like, that's again, the growing pains of our industry. And I feel like, you know, it just snowballs and it goes faster and faster. And you think you have one thing fixed, and then the next thing is the next thing as we hurdle towards, you know, okay, cool. You're all on Patreon and there's a YouTube and there's a Mixer. All right, Mixer's gone. This is happening. Wait, what's happening? Like, what the hell's going on? Like, there'll be a, you know, now y'all work from home and there's a giant virus that's killing everybody. Okay, great, cool. So the one thing I don't know, Andy, and I'm sure you've documented it many times, but for me and people who are watching or listening for the first time, what is the origin story? How did this get started? Because you started at 19 at Game Informer, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So how does that happen? You were there for issue 1. Did you just answer a random ad somewhere? Did you know somebody? Like, how does that happen?
No, I guess I'll give you I'll give you my origin story a la comic books to some degree here. So when you were into games, like when I was in high school and I was into games, not every store carried every game, right? So you'd have to like you'd be like, oh, that rental store has Tengen Tetris. We can go get that there, but we can't get it over here. Oh, if I want to buy Capcom games, I have to go to Capstone. I can't get them at Software Etc. You know, things like that we all had to figure out. So we spent a lot of time, like my weekends would be get in the car, drive to video game stores, see what they had in those video game stores, buy whatever I could afford, go home, play all week, go back out, right?
Yeah.
Rinse, wash, repeat. And eventually, my friend goes, there's a new store in Eden Prairie. It's called Funcoland. We got to go. All right. So we got in the car. We drove out there. I think I was 18 maybe at the time. Like walked in and they had every game. And I was like, this is nuts. I mean, They had so many games. And as I walked in, there was a help wanted sign. So I went up to the guy at the counter and I was like, you guys really need help? Like, you guys need help? Like, I know video games. And this guy, Kevin Conley, who I know now, still know to this day, still talk to him, was like, sure, you know, here's an application, you know, just a little application sheet. I'm like, be back in an hour. I left, drove home, filled it out, drove back, handed it to him and go like, I can do this.
I'm your man.
There's a lot of things I can't do. This I can do. And so they hired me on to be the seasonal, like for the holiday season. And it was crazy back then. We used to handwrite invoices. And like, this was the first Funcoland, and there was literally a line out the door. And so people would come in and we would just be like, what kind of games do you like? You like that kind of game? Oh, you like Mario? Have you ever tried Milan Secret Castle? It's from Hudson. It's great. You're going to love it. Okay, here you go. And like, we grab it, fill it out, take the money, send them on their way. Right. And it was a lot of fun. Like I had a lot of fun talking to a lot of people about games.
Dude, that was the best. Yeah.
And then, because there was no internet necessarily at that point to discuss things. And so the holiday season ended and they were like, hey, you should stay on. We need like kind of a game expert. Because let's say the one thing I had done in my life up to this point is I had played a ton of games, right? And so they kept me on as an expert. I worked in the store. I had a lot of fun. It was great, talking to people and like kind of just getting like, for lack of a better term, like repeat customers who I knew what they had played. We'd be like, we could explore what they wanted and kind of go forward from there. So they were, the guy who owned the company, David Pomage, was like, I pay all this money for these ads in Game Pro. It's too much money. I'm going to start my own magazine. And I was like, yeah, you should start your own magazine. And so, not that he asked me, by the way, but he started making a magazine. And so someone came by and they were like, hey, do you want to write reviews for a magazine? And I was like, I mean, do I? It's like the dream come true. Of course I do. And so they invited, at the time that the editor-in-chief was Elizabeth Olsen, and she came by and she's like, hey, here's a copy of NHL hockey. Play it. And so I played it in the Funco, right? And
in between invoices.
In between invoices, and like hung out and played games and, got reviews. Got it in the first issue. And so I was like, I'm in on this. Like, I would love to do this. And actually, it's funny. My parents were moving back to Texas at that time. And they're like, well, you're going to come back to Texas with us? And I was like, nah, man, I'm going to check out this. I think this magazine thing might work out. I'm going to hang out here. I'm going to stay. And so my parents went back. I went and tried to find someplace to live and stayed in Minnesota to work on this magazine. And so maybe about 2 issues in, I'd become the editorial assistant. And then I just kept kind of working, trying to figure out how to make it better. Cause it was like basically seasonal at the start. Okay. And then it was bi-monthly. It's like January, February, March, April. And then I just kept working on it, trying like, how do we make this thing better? I had problems with the original magazine. Like, don't get me wrong. Like those early ones are weird. Like I didn't like them. And I was like, how do I get this through? And so eventually I just kept going at it. And then eventually convinced the owner, I was like, hey, let me do more, and I can show you what we can do, and put together new business plans, made it monthly, and just kind of took off from there. So it was just pure luck. If I even answered your original question, sorry, I got like
no, that's the origin story for sure. Yeah. I wasn't sure. I knew you had a Funcoland connection, but I wasn't sure the details on it, because obviously growing up, Funcoland was like the place. You know what I mean? And our strip mall in Bloomingdale, Illinois, like you could go to Babbage's or EB in the mall, but across the street from the mall, across the street from Stratford, was a Funcoland that was exactly what you're talking about. You came in and it was just gigantic walls of games, and then you'd get the dirt sheet newspaper, and you'd go home and you'd be like, how much is my collection worth? If I want to trade it all in right now, and go through, and you'd have like the pad of paper with the numbers jotted down of like what you were going to actually get when you rolled in, and inevitably it was like $30 less than you thought you'd get when you walked in. You'd call them, beg for the new number.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. And I really enjoyed that. And so like the first time when I was working on the magazine, for a long time, I was just working in the stores. That's like that's where I met Reiner, who's the new EIC. Oh, yeah. That's where we hired Paul Anderson, was the guy I worked with at the stores. Like we just basically all came from there, and like kept making this magazine, and like just keep going.
When does it get so much that you have to leave the store, though? Like what? Like, is that happen pretty quickly where can it become a full-time job?
Yeah, I mean, it got to be a lot because we had production was outsourced. So like people would lay out the magazine, and like even the early magazines weren't even done digitally yet. Like there was no Quark Express yet at this point. I don't even know if Photoshop exists yet. Boy, I am dating myself very quickly there. Just like that was the way it was done. It was just took a lot of time. I used to spend a lot of time working on the magazine. I mean, our early days, we used to work 80 hours a week minimum. I mean, it was like crazy. Yeah. I used to sleep on the floor. I've got pictures of me sleeping on the floor. It was nuts. I mean, we had to do everything kind of ourselves, but it was fun in that. The one thing I liked about Pomage, who owned it, was that I would be like, he would be like, just do whatever you think. And so we would try things, and some of it was really dumb and really bad.
What was something really dumb?
Oh gosh, we did this thing that was like maybe like origin stories on like characters that we made up. It was just like a dumb, like, let's do a feature like where we tell alternate histories of all these characters. Sure. Right. and they were dumb. Like no one cared, right? But we were like, let's try it.
Gotta fill the magazine.
Gotta fill the magazine. And but like they let us screw up. Like that was my education about how to make game magazines. Was like, try something. That failed. Well, let's try that. Oh, that resonated with people. Let's keep doing that.
I guess that's worth pointing out. Yeah, did you have any formal training? Like, I mean, in high school, did you know you wanted to be a writer? Is that how this was all going?
Nope. No. Nope. I was actually a poor student, probably as well. I think we could add that to the mix.
Okay.
I basically had to learn all this on the job. And
Wow.
to your point, like you brought up earlier, I think it was maybe like year 3 or year 4. We hired this guy, John Storm, and I think it was John. He was like, "Where's our manual of style?" And we were like, "What's a manual of style?" You know?
Then the horror in his face.
Yeah. And it was like, hey, let's all look at the Chicago manual style. Okay, let's read through here. Let's make our own style guide. And like, so we did that, 25 years ago, started working on what a style guide was and what one would be. And we still maintained one through that time.
That's awesome.
Because we thought it was important. But those are things you don't think about, right? Like right away, you're just like, did we get it done? Okay, it was done. Great. Send it. And so that was a lot of things were just done kind of however we could get them done. It was nuts. I mean, those old days were a lot of fun. I can't believe they exist. And we wrote some really crazy stuff. And our reviews used to be like, ha ha ha, that was funny. I really like this character. Boy, the graphics are great. 10. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't really say much, right? It took time for us to become better critics and
of course.
give better analysis. But in the 90s, that's what people wanted. That's what we were imitating things like, trying to be like GamePro, trying to be like EGM, trying to be like Electronic Games. It took us a long time to kind of define our own voice, which I think comes with just repetition and trying and seeing what fits.
Sure.
You and what you like. So
side like it's in line here, but like for your relationship with Funcoland and those relationships you had with repeat customers, this is completely not about Game Informer or you. Do you feel like we've lost something? Like, how it is now down to just pretty much it's, you get it at Walmart, you get it off of Amazon, maybe you're going to a GameStop, maybe you're having a conversation. But like, I'm right there with you of like, not only was the Funcoland like the place to go to try to trade all your stuff in, it was the thing where we'd ride bikes over there and wander the store and actually talk to the clerks. I remember the clerk overhearing us be like, "Oh, you think you're good at WCW NWO Revenge? Come here." Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm going to beat you senseless.
I think, I think there was certainly something magical to those days. I think that's changed a lot. I feel like people now have those relationship with streamers, right? I think that relationship has changed over. So, I think it's different. I think it's unfortunate that I think you really got some like one-on-one time, like at a store like that,
sure,
which was nice. Whereas like on a stream, you maybe, your pog shows up on in chat as it flies by. So I think there's maybe a little bit lost there, but there's so much more information these days and so much more like research you can do that you can find on games. But I mean, it was kind of like, I think to some degree, at least that's the experience I had. I loved being someone's like kind of personal shopper.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
Like that they would come in. I knew what they liked. I remember this is a silly tale, but at the time, you gotta remember this is a long time ago. I was like, video gamers are me. They're dudes in the basement, right? Like that's what I thought they were, because that's just like was my view of the world. And certainly it was not right. And I did not know that. And then when I started working in the store, I remember being like, "Oh, hey, what can I help you with today?" And I'd be like, "Oh, what kind of games does your grandson like?" And this bus driver guy who I loved, he was just the best. He was like, "They're for me, idiot." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Cool. I had no idea." Right. And, he was this old guy and he loved games and we just like got along. And I was like, this guy's like the best. Like, I don't know where he's been, but like we should hang, and he would come in the store. And other times, like, I'd see like moms come in with their kids and I was like, "Oh, we got to take care of the kids." And I'd be like, "Well, what kind of games do you want to get for your kids today?" And she'd be like, "They're for me, idiot." And I'd be like, "I am an idiot. I'm totally an idiot." Right. And like, it took me a while to learn, but it totally changed my perception of who gamers were so quickly. And I loved hearing all these different people and why they liked games. And I always felt like that defined me a lot as a journalist, were those early days at Funcoland, because it just blew my mind how many different people played games and how many people played games and loved games differently than me, right?
Yeah.
You know, because I could easily be like, yeah, Metroid's my favorite game. Here, it's right here. Here's one, Metroid. We got him. Here, take this. This is the best game ever. Play it, right? And they would be like, I didn't like Metroid. I'd be like, how do you not like Metroid, right? Like,
You're
what's
an
wrong with
idiot.
you? Yeah, but I quickly learned that pay attention to what they were saying, pay attention to what kind of games that they liked and why they liked them. And I thought that was incredibly fascinating at the store level, and something that I enjoyed getting a chance to do, which, like you said, maybe is a bit of a lost art. You don't get that kind of personal service, let's say, like that quite anymore.
Yeah, we were talking on PS I Love You this week about like what I'd want to see out of the store and the PlayStation 5 and all that stuff, right? And I kept coming back to and trying to explain this to Blessing, who's like 26 or whatever, and I'm like, it'd be like when you walk into the movie rental store and there'd be jeans picks, you know what I mean? And you're like, you knew you'd picked something off that wall last week, so you kind of know you'd like that guy this week, right? And it's like,
yep,
that's the whole kit and caboodle of all this, trying to figure that out, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's how you found off the wall movies, right? Like that's how you found independent film, I think, was going into those video stores and having those kind of experiences. That's how you found the things that weren't Super Mario 3, right? That's how you found Kid Icarus as games.
We talked about like, the negativity of it, of like, maybe I do have a bad haircut or whatever. Did you did you expect, or did you see it happening that and I use this as loosely as possible because it defines me too, but for lack of a better term, did you see or notice at some point that you were like a celebrity in this space? You know what I mean? For that, I always talk about it, to give you context, like when I started at IGN, the two things I didn't expect were the travel and the internet celebrity. Because like I went to IGN and I read the reviews and I bounced, and it's silly because as a EGM person, like I knew Shu so well, in quotes, from the magazine, that like the first time I saw Shu, I flipped out too. And it's that thing of I never expected somebody to do that for me. And so for you starting a magazine with your friends, sleeping on the floor, making dumb articles about fake histories, did somebody freak out to meet you at an E3 and you're like, why? What's going on? Like I don't get it.
Yeah, one I remember was, I think I was going to see a movie with my friends, and like walked up and I was like, yeah, I'll have a large Coke, and a popcorn. And the kid who was pouring it just like held the cup and just was staring at me and like shaking the cup. And I was like, yeah, it's like a large Coke. That'd be great. And he was just staring. And I was like, and he's like, are you Andy McNamara? And my friends were like, no way. No way is this happening. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I'm a really big fan. And I just like, he's just the sweetest kid, super nice. Eventually, it took him like 5 minutes probably to get this Coke done. We sat there and talked, but that was like the early days of that, I think, a little bit for me.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, be like at an NBA game and be like, oh, running through the crowd, having a cold beer. And then some little kid walks up and is like, hey, I know who you are. And you're like, oh my gosh, I am not ready to talk to children right now.
Pull together.
So, I think there is some of that. Maybe to my detriment, I don't know. I always wanted to push our brand. You know what I mean? Like I'm just maybe old school in that way. I think a lot of people, like modern journalists, do a lot more about creating their own persona. And I was always like pushing Game Informer, the brand. Like, sure. Like I wanted to push, Game Informer Twitter. I wanted to, have all those things to focus on that. So yeah, it was always a little weird to me. Yeah. I mean, I never really, that was not ever really something I sought after, but it's certainly humbling. I mean, it's very, very, like I said, it's so humbling when people are like, oh, I read this. I got so many nice notes when I announced that I was leaving, that were just like, hey man, you helped me. You made me fall in love with games. You know what I mean? Like I've subscribed since this issue, and like they would say things from that issue, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, they really have. Like these people aren't joking around. Like these are real fans, and it's very touching. And so, I'm never going to be as famous as Greg Miller. Let's be quite frank. But
sure, okay.
I enjoyed the little celebrity thing. It's interesting. It's really cool. I mean, I just love talking about games, and I think that's an interesting way to meet people that like games too.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, that's the best thing about it, right? And what this is all about is just talking about games with people that love games. Like, it's a pretty great gig. It's a pretty great way to do it. Question that I've always wondered for you. Was there ever serious talks about moving Game Informer out of Minnesota? You know, I, as a Chicago kid out in the burbs growing up there, my plan was to go to Mizzou, get the degree, come back and work for EGM in Oak Brook, or go up to Minnesota, work with you guys. And so I remember distinctly in college sophomore year opening an EGM, and it was a letter from Shu being like, "We're moving to San Francisco. Entire industry's in San Francisco. We're going to San Francisco." And me being like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to San Francisco at some point." But was there ever that for you guys?
Yeah, at the time, I was asked by someone who, I didn't believe the CEO at GameStop at the time, Dan DiMatteo. He was like, "Do we need to move to California?" And I resisted personally, but I resisted for a reason. Was that I knew how expensive even back then San Francisco was, and I knew there was still a pay problem in games media, and I'd say there's probably still a pay problem in games media. I think games media is severely undervalued as a profession. And to me, at that time, I was like, it's important for me because I had seen we'd lost people early on or whatever. But when you lose someone, you lose more than just like that person was a great writer. You lose someone who's like, that person had played all the Final Fantasies. Like, you don't just replace that, right? Like they knew all this information, right? And they'd learned so much. And I wanted to make sure that Game Informer could have people, if they wanted to be a game reviewer as a career, they could.
Yeah.
Right. Like that was just like super important. And so what's going on?
Oh, don't worry. That's not the live feed. That's Kevin's feed. Or sometimes Kevin. He's getting ready. Eventually I have to read an ad. So he's framing that. But no. You're great, Kevin. You're doing your job. Don't worry. It's just that funny thing that like what is it? Oh, for Kind of Funny Games Daily, when we started doing the things where I was bringing on smaller streamers and stuff, I finally got in the habit of telling them, "Oh, hey, there's at one point I'm going to do a bad transition. You have to say this list name." All right, great. Now that we work from home, I still give no prep to anybody else of like, when Kevin's doing stuff, don't worry, that's not actually the end of the world.
Excellent. Well, so I wanted people to be reviewers. I wanted them to be able to do that as a full-time job. And so in Minnesota, we could pay them enough that if they wanted to have a house and they wanted to have kids, that they could have a family and be a professional game reviewer. And that was more important to me than being closer to the action. Now, you could argue with that was a good or bad call, but that was the call at the time. It was like, let's do that. And I think it worked out. You know what I mean?
But no, I think you say you could argue if it's a good or bad call. I mean, I wasn't on the inside of that, but I never found Game Informer's coverage to be lacking. You know what I mean? I never saw that you guys missed an opportunity that somebody else had. And granted, fewer pages, so like you have to curate to begin with what you're putting in the magazine. But I thought it didn't affect you guys. I always thought it was really cool that you were still there, especially for somebody from the Midwest that wanted to see that be a possibility. And then, you raise a great point that I think is still a huge problem with our side of the industry is that, you have these great people come in and have a wealth of knowledge and stay at a site for a long time or a magazine for a long time and get a lot of experience. But then we run into these things, at least traditionally, and I'm speaking very much from an IGN circa 2015 thing when I left, right?
Yeah.
You run into that thing of, cool, I've hit the ceiling. Like, this is like, my boss is not leaving, his boss is not leaving. And so I either get my cost of living increases for the next thing, I go to a different thing, or I go to PR. Like, that was always the way, right? Like, and then finally, I think you saw, that's way too much, but like, you started to see it be a more thing of going into game development, whether you're talking about a Luke Smith, Mitch Dyer, Scott Lowe, Andrew Goldfarb, right? People that like found their ways over that way, or even Abby from G4, right? But like, it's an interesting thing that it does. I don't want to say pray because that's not the right way, but it does help that usually what happens with these jobs is that you bring in somebody who's fresh out of college. They've wanted to do this their entire life. They will still be the people that you have to tell to go home, stop working, stop doing the thing. And they don't have a family yet and they don't have a stuff. But as those adult decisions start coming, right, that's usually when you see people have to make those choices. I think Klepek just posted about it not too long ago of like, you know what I mean? One of the things of wanting to move back to Chicago was to be able to afford a house and have a family and do these things.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's important that it be something that we start to value that as much
100%.
as I think it should be. And that's, that's my own personal take in a lot of ways too, is that like, I always feel like Hollywood does a really great job of kind of supporting its own like media infrastructure. And like, I think a lot of times like game companies are like, oh, well, they cover it anyway. It's fine.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like they move on. I think that's something that could change, certainly.
So I don't want this to be a leading question because I don't mean it that way, but as you were there so long and everything kept happening, and we've talked about the layoffs being the moment where I gotta go. Was there a push and pull behind the scenes with GameStop in terms of like them being the, I don't want to say corporate overlords, but I'm saying, how everything gets painted on the internet. Of course they gave this a good review. They probably did the and like, I know that shit from IGN, of course, which doesn't make any sense and isn't how it goes. But was there a push and pull of trying to watch the budget, figure this out, move the company, shrink the staff, or anything like that?
I mean, I think there's two different questions there, maybe. So one would be, I was never told to give something a score or anything like that, right? Or to do any particular cover. I just want to make sure that's kind of out there. There was never that pull. We were very autonomous in what we chose and why we did it. Like we made our own decisions. That said, I mean, when you work at a corporation, corporations make decisions. You can agree and disagree with those decisions.
Yeah.
Like the priorities, right? Like the priorities that they have, right? I think that's one of those things that's maybe a challenge I would lay out would be that, GameStop was a retailer who owned a media company, right? So did they understand the challenges of media companies? They understood the challenges of a retailer, right? Did they understand the benefits of a media company? They understood the benefits of a retailer, right? I think that was always a challenge that we had, was that explaining to them the value of Game Informer.
Sure.
At least that's the challenge I had, and that's maybe the thing I failed at. And that's I think what that's the thing is that I they don't seem to be listening to anything I'm saying.
I kept talking; they weren't listening.
So I think to some degree that does come to a point and plays a role in my decision, certainly for me personally.
Yeah.
As someone who that was my job overall. Like when I wanted to make a new GameInformer.com for like 7 years. And eventually I was like, well, we're just going to do it in our free time. And we did like a game jam at our office with our programmers, and we made it in 2 weeks and we tested it. And then we were like, this works. And then for the next 2 or 3 months in our downtime, we built that thing.
Wow.
Could never get anyone to sign off on it. So the GameInformer.com that was there, we built it. And we just went to them and said, we made a new one. Here it is.
That's awesome.
So like, that's the kind of thing it took to create change. And that's a lot of effort, by the way. That's basically building a whole CMS for anyone, content management system, and figuring out a way to migrate the whole thing. It was an undertaking, but the team was super talented and they pulled it off. But that's kind of what it took to move the needle a bit.
Okay.
So, I'm trying to straddle things here, Greg.
No. I mean, in the same thing, I don't tell you Kevin's going to fuck anything up. We never do a pre-interview. I never tell you what I'm going to talk about. And I know I'm not going to press. I'm not going to get in there or anything like that. You know what I mean? How badly is Reiner going to screw this up, you think? You know what I mean?
Oh, no, right. I mean, I've worked with Reiner for 26 years, right? Yeah. Like Reiner knows how to make, and the other thing too is I've always had to do other things, right? I think the new thing is that Reiner, I've always been like, I can leave this content to Reiner and these content decisions to Reiner because he knows what he's doing, right? I don't need to worry about that as I like tackle these other things. I mean, I think that'll be a challenge is, he has to take on a new role. It comes with like new challenges, right? Yeah. And so, but Reiner's going to kill it. I mean, Reiner wants it to be successful, and that's a big part of it. Like the will, right? Like the will to want to make something great is how you make something great. And Reiner definitely has the will.
He's great. I've always loved him.
So, I have complete faith in him.
So that's where Game Informer's at.
That's where Game Informer's
You played games all day yesterday. What is the rest? What you've been very vague. You said,
yeah,
I'm leaving Game Informer after 29 years. I'm also leaving games journalism, but I'm not leaving games. What does that mean?
Well, okay. So this is the part where it's like, when I said like, what could I do next? And I think, for me as a goal, I was like, what can I do to go learn more about games? Like where can I go learn about games? Who's doing something interesting? Who's doing something fun? So I started talking to people just at events and things like that, being like, hey, I'm looking around, like what do you think I could do for you? And I was very lucky. Tracy Thompson was like, hey, I'm trying to do some stuff. We're trying to do some things. What do you think about this? And she came and started talking to me about going to EA.
Yeah.
So I was like, I made fun of EA over my years. So don't get me wrong. Like, 29 years, I've made fun of every video game company on the planet, right? Like,
if you've taken a breath, you've made fun of EA, all right?
And I was like, tell me more, right? Like, let's find out what's going on. And, she came and kept talking to me about it. And she was like, what do you think about coming and working with me and working with the devs and working on like telling their stories and strategies behind the things that they're doing? And I was like, that sounds kind of fun. EA's got crazy amount of developers. They've got BioWare, they've got Respawn, DICE.
Joseph Ferris, go talk to him.
Yeah, I know. It's like there's crazy amount of stuff. I mean, it's weird. You did the EA Play recently, right?
I did.
Squadrons, I think looks really cool.
Yeah.
I'm excited about what they're doing with Skate. And so the more I learned, I was like, this is interesting. And then, I started to do some research. And one of the things was Laura Miele. She did an interview in Game Informer in 2019. And I thought she was like very honest and straightforward with her answers to the questions about like what's going on. What, these are things that gamers want. And like, that was important. I thought at EA Play, she did the same thing where she was like, hey, we want to listen to what gamers want. That's how they made Skate, right? And I think that's interesting. I think that's super fascinating. So I took a job at EA. That's where I'm going. I start on Monday. So,
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So it all came pretty quickly. And I've been working towards this for a while. But I'm super excited. I think like things like with what Respawn's doing,
Sure.
Apex Legends. When I was thinking about what I was going to do, they came out. I think EA came out very quickly about, with their stance on Black Lives Matter, which mattered a lot to me at the time. I was like, wow, these guys are like moving quickly to like make change.
Sure.
They brought out thing about, I think maybe Call of Duty may have been the fastest about like, we're going to do something about,
racism in the games. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, and then EA was right behind him. And I was like, I love this. Like, I am down with this. I am down for this change. I think this change is important. So like basically I went and talked to like John Reesberg and Tracy and the rest, and like, I'm going to go work with them and the rest of the EA crew. And
so is it going to be like an editorial thing where you're writing all this? Is that the idea? Like you're doing like a blog or whatever? Or?
No, I'm not. So by the way,
you don't know, do you? You don't know what you're doing there.
No, I mean, I think that's the thing is that I think that that's the fun part, right? I think that's what I'm excited about is that they have a lot of crazy games going on. And it's basically, I think I've been telling stories for a long time, right? Like I talk about the magazine, like I go to developers and I hear what they have to say, and I try to listen and try to figure out what makes these games interesting and try to tell people about it and have those honest conversations about the games. And this is an opportunity to work with all these devs to go and this time get in there, see their games early, see what's going on. You know what I mean? Like, because that's basically, I'm doing like communication strategy. So it's like, go figure out how we can talk about those games. Now, what that could be, it could be a lot of things, right? I mean, I think there's people that run blogs. There's people that do a lot of different ways that they communicate about games. I want to figure out what we could do there and what they're interested in doing and what they might want to build. I mean, I love building stuff, Greg. I would love to do some more things and work with like people like yourself and everyone else out there to come up with new ways to talk about games. And I think to be more hopefully transparent about the games and where they're going and what they're doing and why they're great. One of the things that really impressed me, and I want to point this one out, was, and I like when I talked about going there, was Battlefront 2. That game came out and had some challenges, right? And EA didn't have to, and they spent the last 2 years working to make that a better experience for everyone involved, right? And I think at the end, they really crushed it. I think they really did a great job of like making a better game, being transparent with their community, and like getting out there and telling stories and doing cool things with Star Wars.
Yeah.
I loved Jedi Fallen Order.
Hell yeah, you did.
It's a great game. I know the team over there, right? And I know whatever they're going to do next is going to be impressive. But honestly, like that was one of the most impressive Star Wars stories I've seen in a while.
Yeah, 100%.
And I don't know, anytime you work with someone like Disney and Star Wars, those are always big licenses. And when you can go out and create something, I think, really interesting in that space, that means that wasn't one person. That was a whole group that worked to get that kind of stuff done. You know what I mean? That takes the will of a company to get those things done. And to me, that's impressive. So I'm really excited to go and work on that kind of stuff and get that information out there. So how we do it, I don't know yet. I'm kind of excited to start on Monday. I'm excited to go talk to all the developers, see what they're doing, see what EA and how EA wants to do it, and learn a lot. Work with Gino. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, all these people that were on the other side of the email for so long, now you're in these meetings with them. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really fun, and I just want to get a chance to tell. I want to tell these stories, right? I think BioWare they've got a redemption story coming. I want to be a part of that, right?
Sure.
I think there's a lot of interesting things happening over there, and I was lucky that they asked me to come along. So I'm super interested in where it's going.
Is part of your excitement for that and what lured you to the job is that idea of redemption? I think that's the thing where, obviously, as you said, we've all talked shit about EA at some point and kicked them around, and deservedly so, for like something like Battlefront 2. But it is that thing that I do see them make moves where I honestly believe, and I know, go ahead and tear me apart in the comments, that they are trying to get back to being the EA people want them to be. And so like, I feel like, does that speak to you when they're like, well, we're obviously doing things different? You talk about Laura, right? Who it's the exact same thing of, I remember when, Imran, when he got laid off and did his first Games Daily with us afterwards, I was talking about some EA story and he threw out all this information about her and how he was like, she actually has a lot of great ideas in this. And I think she's being groomed to be that. And it was like, oh my gosh, like even from that there's these seeds planted, I feel. And when you look at the stuff they're doing with originals and independent developers, and when they're bringing back something like Skate, and obviously, yeah, you can sit there and they're this monolithic giant corporation. But to your point, and the point that I always drive back when I do stuff is like, there are people behind these games. There are developers behind these games who are doing the long hours and pouring their heart and soul into this and trying to make the best thing possible. And I think them hiring you to come in and tell those stories speaks to the fact that what we've done before doesn't work. Let's get the actual humanity out in front, and let's remind people that whether they're indies or whether they're the biggest AAA studio going, they have something here.
That is what you nailed it, Greg. I mean, that's what I think. I was, when Command and Conquer came out, I was like, oh, they're redoing Command and Conquer. And I had just come off Blizzard's kind of like, the Warcraft 3 thing was like kind of a mess. And I got Command and Conquer, and I was like, they nailed this. They nailed this. This is a great remake, like really, really fantastic. And you're right. I went and talked to all my friends that work there, and they were all like, people give them grief, but this is a great company to work for. So I went and got those testimonials from people, and then I looked at where they were going and where I think they are trying to. I want to say they're trying to get back to being about the game devs, right? Like when we look at like when it started, like I have a story like, I picked up Trip Hawkins in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, in like my girlfriend's horrible car, right? Way back in the day. It was like embarrassing. There would have been like fast food like in the seat.
I was going to say, pushing the McDonald's wrappers out of the way.
Yeah. And like, and I think back to like the old EA and like when they were like the electronic artists. And I really get that vibe that like they want to put the developers front and center. They say things like players first, like that it matters. And I think that's the reality of today. Right. And I think, I hope they know if you're inviting me to come be a part of it, that's what I'm about, right? Like, sure. Is that I want to be about the devs. I want to be about the players. I want to be about doing everything I can to make that better and make the conversations better. And not that they're not already doing amazing things. It's just like, that's what matters to me. And it feels like it's an opportunity. And I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, and I think that's awesome. Like, and again, back to just for full disclosure, everybody watching, like again, pre-interview, I did not know until you knew where he's going. Like I didn't want to know. I like being on the tip of my seat with you guys.
I haven't really told anybody, so it's kind of weird to say it out loud, but I needed to get it out there. But I'm like really excited. Like I really am. Like I get to talk to. I was talking to Tracy. I was like, oh, I want to talk to these devs. I want to talk to these devs, and I want to get their stories out. I want to tell their stories, and I think that's really what excites me.
That's what always attracts me to talking to developers, period. But like, it's the same thing of like, for EA Play, which was fun to host and everything. But like talking to Ian and having him, from EA Motive, bring up like his drawings that he did of Star Wars cockpits that he would pause. And now he's making the game where you're flying in the cockpit. I was like, this is a story unto itself. You know what I mean? Like I would love to have him on a podcast just to talk about that, of like what it's like. And if you can do that, if you can help facilitate those kind of stories from the developers who are making these kind of games, that's fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah.
And
no more. And like, no one can scream at me for my review anymore. I did Last of Us 2. They can scream at me a lot about that. I don't have to do any more reviews and get
you'll miss it. You'll be begging to come back. Look, you're already asking for a Ghost of Tsushima code. I know. So wait, do you have to move then?
Yeah, I'm actually going to move to LA. Yeah. Oh. It was like I figured, why not? Let's change everything up.
Sure. So blow it all up.
They've got Dice LA Respawn's there.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited to go see. I guess I feel like LA and Seattle and San Francisco are the three big, video game towns in this industry in the US. I mean, Montreal's obviously huge too, but I kind of like to your earlier question, like what's it like to always be in Minneapolis? I want to go where the action is.
Yeah.
Right.
That's awesome,
and so we're going to move out there and see what's going on. And I think it's going to be, it's going to be crazy. LA, I've visited, many times. There's definitely negatives. There's definitely positives. But it's definitely different than Minnesota, but it's gonna be fun.
Yeah, you're in for a culture shock for sure, full time. Yeah, maybe one day when we can travel, I'd love to come down and hang out, but we'll see.
Yeah, of course.
For now, Andy McNamara, I'm going to invite you into the friend zone, where the kind of funny best friends write in with their questions for you. But before then, let me pay some bills and remind you, this is We Have Cool Friends. It is our interview show that we do each and every week. Usually, it's a regularly scheduled programming. You should subscribe on youtube.com/kindafunny, iTunes, podcast services around the globe. Be like our Patreon producers, Mohammed, aka Momo, and the Predator, Ala Tribesman. Today we're brought to you by Honey, and let me tell you about them. If you didn't know, everybody, Honey is this online shopping tool we all use. I just used it yesterday on TeePublic when a kind of funny best friend sent me a shirt I wanted. I went over there, and what happens is basically, I'm getting ahead of myself. You install Honey in your Chrome browser. Right there next to my bar. You can't see it, but I can see it. There's a little Honey H. When you go to any website from there on out and you check out, Honey pops down. It's this little coin guy who dances, and he says, "Do you want me to check for coupons?" And I say, "Yes, little coin guy. I would love you to do that." And I click the button, and then the Honey guy dances around and he finds the best product code he can for me to get me a discount on whatever I'm buying. Honey installs, I think, there's a few seconds or whatever, but they have a whole thing here, right? They want me to say it's like 2 clicks or something. 3 clicks. I don't know. What I'm telling you is I use it legitimately all the time, every day when I buy anything anywhere. You should too. Like I said, it saves you the money, but then it also earns you Honey coins that you can then get for gift cards and stuff. And I got a bunch of Amazon gift cards that way. I remember Kevin did something about that too recently. Isn't that right, Kevin? Thank you, Kevin. It can save you wherever you shop online. It's great. Honey has found over 17 million members, over $2 billion in savings. Did you know that Honey supports over 30,000 stores online, and they're adding more every day? Honey has over 100,000 5-star reviews on Google Chrome Store. Not using Honey is literally passing up free money. It's free, and it takes just seconds to install. Plus, it's now part of the PayPal family. Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/morning. That's joinhoney.com/morning. What did you do, Kevin? I heard you giggle and everyone in the chat saying Kevin.
Yeah,
you pop up on my screen.
They couldn't hear me. No, they couldn't hear me. So champagne flutes. I got champagne flutes and wine glasses. Off Anthropology, got 20% off, which is significant.
There you go. I like the idea that somebody who's a big Andy fan is showing up for the first time and they think I'm just crazy. Like, I'm like, what did you get, Kevin? And then I just sit here in silence while nothing happens. And I'm like, great job, Kevin. And we move on. Andy, welcome to the friend zone. These questions were submitted on patreon.com/kindafunny. Jacob Meyer, AKA YK, says, hi, Andy. I just wanted to say how much I loved Game Informer from issue number 87 and for a good many years after. I fell off from reading magazines of any kind, but I have great memories of waiting for each magazine every month and reading your and other editors' opinions. And also, all the weird bits you would do. So just thank you. And one actual question. I'm kind of curious if you can recall off the top of your head which cover number 87 was.
Wow, that's super hard.
Right? I was wondering, it's like you meet some people who can do that are like, oh yeah, number 87, it was this thing, blah, blah, blah. And like, I could never in a million years do that about anything.
Well, the hard part there is that like, I don't think we were like putting the number too terribly far forward. And the other thing too, I don't know, this is maybe a magazine thing, but the thing about working in magazines is I never know what month it is because the magazine industry, for some strange reason, always put like a month ahead. So like when your March issue would arrive, it would hit in February. You know what I mean? And you'd work on it.
It's the worst. I remember it very well. Yeah.
And then you'd work on it in January and you'd talk in January about how you were working on March. Do you know what I mean? Like, so I was always confused. So to say what number 87, but I'm going to make a guess.
I have it pulled up in front of me. So you let me know.
I'm going to make a guess.
Do you want the year? Do you want the month and the year?
Yeah, give me the year.
Number 87 was July 2000.
So that would have still been played. I'm gonna go with this could be really bad. I'm gonna go with wrestling. I'm gonna go with that we had wrestling on the cover. I'm gonna guess.
If I didn't know better, I would say you cheated. But I've seen you haven't Googled anything, and I did not tell you any of this before. And it was, in fact, WWF, a video game triple threat. Hardcore previews for Dreamcast, PlayStation, and Nintendo 64. And it's Triple H on the cover, surrounded by fire.
Wow. I can't believe I got that right.
That is impressive, Andy. That is impressive, sir. I am shocked.
I will admit, I had to put my collection together when I left the office last week. So I had to like go through. So I looked through all the covers recently, and I remember just that year. It would have been before just the era, I guess, more than anything. So wow, that's crazy.
Look at you. What a pro. Wow. Proud of
Triple threat.
For you, I mean, again, 29 years here. What cover story stands out to you when you think of doing a cover? Like, what's I mean, it can be a few or whatever, but like, what are the ones that spring to mind, whether they be crazy things you did, stories that came together last second, or anything like that? Like, what are the memorable ones for you?
Well, memorable. I remember I loved when we did, I have a lot of them. I remember when we did.
Hold on, one question, then I'm going to toss this in there because I'm actually stepping on a question coming up in the friend zone. Not actually Bob Dole said, hi, Andy and Greg. Hope you're doing well. Question for Andy. What was your biggest memorable / breakout moment in games journalism that you think back on often? Any highlights from your career that you're proud that stick with you today? So I want to toss that in there in case we do that. And then I get to the question like I just answered. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah, no, I would say, no, those are both good. I would say, I remember when I got to see Assassin's Creed early on, and then we revealed that at E3 was like when they also announced the game, and I was super impressed by that game. That was a fun one. Yeah. One of my favorite ones ever is our BioShock reveal. That was one where we actually went we went out and we wrote a little like kind of like extra thing on the cover that was like descriptive of the area and like the world. Because it was one of those games where we're like, man, the world means so much. Like just having a Big Daddy on the cover is not enough. Like we really have to like explain to them like why this game is cool. And we spent so much time coming up with this little paragraph that we put on the front cover. But that game was like that was a really fun one to do and really interesting in that like I had ran into Ken Levine a couple times before, and he'd been like, I make these games and like no one cares and what's going on. And then he invited me to New York to the Take-Two offices, which were the old Take-Two offices, which I think eventually burned down. And they were full of like insane, crazy, expensive art. Like at the like it was like a museum. I'm not even kidding. And he invited me up there, but my plane was late. I had been like somewhere else on the East Coast. Got there super late, like ran into him in the middle of the night. Went in and snuck into this darkened office and like chatted with him in this back room, like once again, lavish, like insane office. That and he just showed me BioShock and was like, "What do you think of this?" Like, and started telling me about where it was going. And I was like, I'm completely enthralled with this. Tell me more. Like, and I was just like, I'm so into this. And so that was a really fun story to do and tell and be a part of, and kind of like those kind of reveals. Man, I remember going and talking to Neil Druckmann and Bruce, and going to Naughty Dog and seeing The Last of Us for the first time. I mean, there were so many games I was very lucky to see. Yeah. Like, I don't know. They was like, Andy, I really do think you're the first person to see this outside of the company, right? Like I got to do that a lot. And especially, it was really fascinating. I remember when I saw Riddick for the first time was also when I became friends with Pete Wannett. I went to Universal and they were like, "We've got this game to show you." And I was like, "I don't know that I care." And then I came in and I had to sign all these NDAs, and they had the like film production team like sitting behind me, and they were like kind of watching what was going on.
Were they behind the one-way mirror, just like scratching their beards?
And then like Pete Wannett came out and he was like all F-bombs and like, this is gonna be unbelievable. And I was like, I am so in on Riddick, and I was so excited to do that cover. It kind of like blew my mind at the time, and I was like, I'm in on this. And that happened a lot. Like I just went and saw games that really got me excited, and we got a chance to put them on the cover. And I tell you, when I was going through all the old ones, there are a lot of them. I got a lot of stories. I mean, 327 issues, and I have 327 stories. By the way, I have a story about each and every one of those issues.
Question I always wonder about, like, I guess not the. Do you have the story of like the one that got away? How many times did your cover fall through at the last second or something like that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like in .coms, that's so much easier, right? Of like, oh, this thing didn't happen. Either put up an update or don't even acknowledge it. Who cares? Yeah. But like for you guys, there's the hard deadline of we got to go to print.
Yeah, we had one. Funny enough, we were working on a Lord of the Rings cover. Oh. No, we were working on a Lord of the Rings cover with EA, actually for a Lord of the Rings game that never came out.
Oh.
And so it was Friday, like 4:00. And people were like, "Hey, we're done. The issue ships on Monday. This is great. We're way ahead. Everything's done." Walking out the door, and my phone rings, and I'm like, "Okay." Pick it up, and it's like, "Wait, what?" And essentially, they didn't have by the time the game was going to come out, they weren't going to have the license anymore.
Oh my god!
So the game was dead. And it was like, there's no arguing with that, right? You can't be like, but we can cover this anyway, right? And it was like, no, it's done. Like, it's not happening. And so I turned around as I was walking out the door and said, "All right, everybody, we don't have a cover. We got to figure something out." And we wrote a like top 50 games that weekend. The whole team came in and we wrote it that weekend. We came up with a cover design and put it out 3 days later. So yeah, there are definitely stories like that. And there's stories where we did a game and then they canceled it, like Fear and Respect, things like that we were we were pretty excited about, and we saw them and thought they were cool, and then they went out, and then the company was like, "Nope, we're not doing that." But yeah, I mean, there's always something. You know what I mean? That's you kind of, if you're going to work in a magazine, you always want to do the like, stop the presses. And I got to do that once or twice, with some things along the way.
I doubt you were ever happy about it, though.
No.
Stop the presses. No. We had a lot of work to do. We got a lot of work to do and not a lot of time to do it.
Correct. Yeah, it was nuts.
Luke Lewis writes into patreon.com/kindoffunny. It says, "Hi, Andy, and congratulations on the amazing career at Game Informer. GI was my first gaming magazine as a kid and a huge inspiration for me wanting to pursue video games journalism. My question for you is this. After 29 years in the industry, you've seen a lot change. But what do you believe is the future of games journalism in terms of the way news outlets cover games? Thanks so much for all of your work, and best of luck on your next chapter."
It's an interesting question. I love that question. I think there's a lot of challenges. I think to some degree, like, I think I'm a big fan of what you're doing here. I think there's a lot to be said for building up around a community. I think communities are at the heart of a lot of the conversation now, because it is so difficult to be in the news space. And by the way, I'd like to point this out. Like, just like I think we're living in a world where like local papers or small papers are going to crash, where there may be even large cities that don't have their own paper due to how media has changed, where we may have things like the New York Times or the Washington Post, where there's only like these larger pillars covering a whole nation.
Sure.
I think that that's a possibility. And I think that's also kind of what's happening in the game space, that a lot of the larger kind of like media spaces are really just all coming together and creating those one spots.
Yeah.
So I think that's a challenge. And so I think it's created a space where there's less opportunity to find those stories. I definitely think, for us, you talk about Game Informer's history of like, we used to be able to go and like, really reveal these games that had never been seen anywhere before. That becomes harder and harder when I think the consumer wants for you to say 3 months out, be like, here's this game, it's coming. They want to play it almost immediately after it comes out.
Yeah.
Or something even like Apex that like, just here's the game.
Yep.
Like, just go play it. And so a lot of the early kind of discussions and look at games maybe is switched to where it's more conversation after a game comes out. So I feel like those communities that come from that are really important. I also feel like specialty is a real thing when we have so many games that are that live on, right? Like I'm a longtime WoW player, right? When you have these persistent worlds.
Yeah.
I played EverQuest back in the day. I played so much EverQuest back in the day. And I think back then I was always like, hey, I don't need to play 50 games this year. I need to play these 5 or 6 games I really love. And I still have that thing where I usually fall into 1 or 2 games that are kind of my hobby games. And then I play the other kind of single player games that I get through.
Sure.
And so I think that discussion and that level of coverage of a single product is so different, right? Especially with like esports and things like that go around.
Totally,
like, so
totally.
Like, it's not like Call of Duty just comes out and it's done. It's just the beginning of the conversation about like Call of Duty, right? And so with seasons and everything like that, it really has changed the way the media can talk about games. And by the way, I also think that opens the door where I think when there's good journalism and stuff like that going on at like Kotaku or Polygon or IGN and GameSpot and Game Informer, that's really looking at other things outside of just when is this game coming out. And they're forced to do those things because I think the dialogue about the games has changed.
Sure.
So it's going to be, the future of media is that it's going to continue to change.
Yeah, continue to evolve, right? And fill in what people need it to be. I think that's the biggest part of it. And then final question. You couldn't be here and we couldn't not ask you, Andy McNamara. Game and Watch Live says, I'm curious, what is his personal favorite game?
I always say this because I always say Metroid. Even though you could easily argue, and I would probably argue that Super Metroid is better.
Sure.
Is that I remember playing games. I played a lot of Atari games, and I played a lot of Intellivision games, and I played a lot of ColecoVision games. And I remember the crash. I remember going to my friend's house and being like, oh, Atari 5200. This is kind of garbage. Oh, Atari 7800. This is kind of garbage. The games that were coming out were kind of garbage. Like gaming is really like was faltering. I was still going to arcades and they were still fun, but gaming, it was like weird, like just to kind of watch games really stagnate at that moment. And in one of my friends and I moved on, right? I still played games like the arcades, but I quit playing so many games. There's like a year and a half of my life where I didn't really play games. And then a friend of mine got the NES. And I went over there and I was like, what is going on? Right. And just started playing. And I just immediately fell in love with games because of Metroid. It blew my mind in 1986 or whatever. And that started me down the path. So I owe so much of my career to Metroid. And my love of those games, and I still play them to this day. I love when people make things like Ori that really pay homage to that style of game, and Hollow Knight, things like that. Sure. So really define me in a lot of ways. But I do love my MMOs. I love my WoW. I love those kind of persistent games, and It's always fun to shoot people too.
Of course.
Metroid is my answer.
Great answer. Andy, thank you for being one of our cool friends.
Yeah. Thank you for being my cool friend. Let's just talk about that.
No.
Yes, Greg. Thank you. No, and thanks everyone for watching and having me on the show. It's very humbling, like I said before. Thank you.
No, I'm proud of you. It's quite a career, quite a legacy you've left. And then this EA thing sounds awesome. So congratulations on that.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
I'll tell you when I go on Monday and find out.
Exactly. I've made a horrible mistake. Reiner, do you need an editorial assistant? Ladies and gentlemen, this, of course, has been We Have Cool Friends, our cool friend interview show we do each and every week. We Have Cool Friends will be back on Monday the 13th with a TBA guest. A couple of different irons are in the fire as we try to finalize who it'll be. So stay tuned. That's about it. Andy, where can people keep up with you?
The Real Andy Mac on Twitter.
There you go.
Yeah.
Remember, subscribe on youtube.com/kindafunny. Support us on patreon.com/kindafunny to get your questions read. Usually get a schedule of what's happening. Sorry, that didn't happen this week. And then you can get the show on podcast services around the globe. But no, until next time, it's been our pleasure to serve you.